There is a kind of courage that gets celebrated. The courage to begin, to take the risk, to bet on yourself, to step into the unknown. But there is another kind, one people rarely talk about, the courage to admit that the path you chose may no longer be the path you should continue. Because starting takes courage, but so does stopping. So does changing your mind. So does turning around after you have already told everyone where you were going. Welcome back to 5 Minutes Forward. 5-minute mindset shifts for a better life. I'm your host, Quincy Hampton. Sometimes we remain committed long after the commitment has stopped serving us, not because the path is right, but because leaving feels embarrassing. We think about the time we've invested, the money we spent, the sacrifices we made, the people who believed in the decision, and we tell ourselves, I've already come too far to turn back now. So we keep moving. Even when the direction feels wrong, even when the goal no longer fits the narrative, even when the person pursuing it is no longer the person we have become. Last week, we talked about alignment, about making sure your values, choices, and direction are facing the same way. But recognizing misalignment is only the beginning. Once you see it, you have to decide whether you are brave enough to respond. We praise consistency, and usually we should. Consistency builds skill, trust, momentum, character, but consistency becomes dangerous when it turns loyalty to a decision, simply because you made it first. There is a difference between persistence and refusal to reassess. Persistence says, this is difficult, but still matters. Stubbornness says, this no longer feels true, but I cannot bear to admit that I may need to change. One is rooted in purpose. The other is often rooted in pride. Courage is being honest enough to know which one is driving you. Psychology gives this pattern a name, the sunk cost effect. It describes our tendency to continue investing in something because of what we have already put into it. Even when continuing may cost us more. We do it with careers, relationships, business ideas, goals, versions of ourselves. We think leaving would make the past investment meaningless. But the time you have already spent cannot be recovered by spending more time in the wrong direction. Past effort is information. It is not a life sentence. What you learned still belongs to you, the discipline still belongs to you, the experience still belongs to you. Changing direction does not erase the journey, it changes what the journey becomes useful for. We often describe changing direction as quitting, but sometimes it is correction. A pilot does not remain on the wrong course to prove commitment to the original coordinates. A driver who misses an exit does not keep going forever because turning around feels inconvenient. They adjust, not because the destination no longer matters, but because it matters enough to stop pretending that the current route will take them there. That is the pivot. A pivot is not random movement. It is deliberate change based on clearer information. You know more now about the path, about the cost, about yourself. Wisdom means allowing new information to influence an old decision. Changing direction can feel terrifying because it forces you to face questions you may not be ready to answer. What will people think? Did I waste my time? What happens if the next path fails too? Who am I without this goal? The last question can be the hardest because sometimes a goal becomes more than something you pursue. It becomes the way you explain yourself, your title, your identity, your proof that you are going somewhere. Letting go can feel like losing a part of who you are, but you are not only the path you chose, you are also the person capable of choosing again. I have learned that changing direction does not always feel brave in the moment. Sometimes it feels like confusion, failure, embarrassment. Sometimes the strongest decision looks weak to people who do not know what it costs you to make it. But there comes a point when protecting an old image of yourself begins to threaten the future version of yourself. And at that point, the question is no longer whether you can keep going. The question is, why are you still going? Now, not every difficult season requires a pivot. Sometimes the work is simply hard. Sometimes growth feels uncomfortable because growth is supposed to stretch you. So how do you know whether you are changing direction or merely escaping discomfort? Ask yourself, if this became easier tomorrow, would I still want it? If the pressure disappeared, would the destination still feel meaningful? If no one judged you for leaving, would you choose to stay? These questions separate fatigue from misalignment. You may discover that you do not need a new path. You may simply need rest, support, a new strategy. But you may also discover that difficulty is not the real problem. The destination is. Here's your 5-minute forward challenge for the week. Choose one area of your life where you have been continuing mainly because you've already started. Then write down 2 sentences. The reason I began was, and the reason I am continuing now is. Look at the difference. Are you still driven by purpose, or are you being driven by pride, fear, habit, or the need to prove that your original decision was right? Do not make a reckless choice today. Make an honest observation. Then identify one responsible next step. That could be gathering more information, having one difficult conversation, testing a new direction, setting a deadline for reassessment. Courage does not always demand an immediate leap. Sometimes it begins with refusing to lie to yourself one more day. There is no prize for reaching the wrong decision efficiently. There is no honor in abandoning yourself to remain consistent with an outdated decision. You are allowed to learn. You are allowed to evolve. You are allowed to admit that the person who chose the path did not know what the person standing here now knows. The pivot does not mean you were foolish to begin. It may mean you are finally wise enough to adjust. Sometimes courage is taking the first step, and sometimes courage is taking the next step in a completely different direction. That is the pivot, not running from your life, but refusing to spend it, proving you can survive a path you no longer want. Next week on 5 Minutes Forward, we'll talk about uncertainty and how to move when you no longer have a clear map, but you know you cannot remain where you are. Keep moving forward.